The low growl was not a threat. It was a judgment. Alara felt it vibrate through the flagstones, up through the worn leather of her shoes, and settle deep in her bones. She did not dare. She kept her eyes fixed on the man standing before her, the man whose shadow fell over her like a headsman in axe. Lord Valerius, master of the hunt, the late king in left hand, and now the arbiter of this impossible moment. His face was all harsh, angles and crepuscular stillness. A study in granite, only his eyes moved, dark and analytical. Stripping away her rough-spun servantine dress, her anonymity, her carefully constructed invisibility, he was looking for a flaw, a trick, some thread of conspiracy he could pull to unravel this. He would not find one. "It is a mistake," he said. His voice was like the rasp of a blade being drawn from a frozen scabbard. Not loud, but it cut through the shocked silence of the antechamber. They were alone, but the weight of the entire court pressed in from the grand hall behind them where the Kinger bier still lay cold. Grief can unsettle them. Alara finally looked past him, not at his face, but at the creature settled at her feet. Kyr, the gray ghost of the north, the kinging's soul-bound companion, a beast of nightmare and legend. Its fur was the color of storm clouds, its eyes chips of amber in a massive, wolf-like head. It was larger than any pony, built of muscle and ancient loyalty. And it had pushed through a cordon of armored royal guards, past dukes and princes, to lay its great head on her worn-out shoes. A low, guttural sigh from the beast. A puff of warm air against her ankle. A beast choosing its next keeper at a funeral had not happened in 200 years. Everyone in that courtyard knew exactly what it meant. And everyone, especially the man before her, wished it had chosen anyone else. "He is not unsettled, my lord," Alara said. Her own voice was a stranger to her, steady and low when it should have been trembling. It was the voice she used when calming a panicked horse, not when addressing the most dangerous man in the kingdom. "He has chose?" Valerius' stillness was an act of aggression. Other men postured, raised their voices. He simply existed, a point of immense pressure in the air around him. It chose a scullery maid. "The law is old, girl. It was not written for the likes of you." The insult was meant to sting, to make her flinch and reveal her insignificance. But she had been insignificant her whole life. It was not a weapon that could harm her. "The law was not written for the likes of Eneron," she corrected him, her gaze unwavering. "It was written for the bond." The beast does not care for tights. His jaw tightened, a barely perceptible shift of muscle. It was the first crack in the grant. He had expected tears, or fear, or perhaps greedy ambition. He had not expected this quiet, unyielding reason. He had expected a girl. He had not accounted for the woman who had survived in the corners and shadows of his castle by being smarter, quieter, and more observant than anyone gave her credit for. He took a half-step closer, a deliberate invasion of her space. He smelled of cold air, of leather, and of something metallic, like blood recently scrubbed from his hands. "This changes nothing. You will be housed. You will be watched. And when the beast comes to its senses, you will be returned to your duties. Do you understand?" It was not a question, it was a command, a reassertion of the world as it was supposed to be. But the world had already tilted on its axis. The warm, heavy weight at her feet was proof. Alara did answer. Instead, she slowly, deliberately, lowered her hand. Her fingers brushed the coarse fur between current ears. The beast did not flinch. It leaned into her touch, a rumble of contentment starting deep in its chest. Her gaze lifted back to Valerius, and for the first time, she let him see the steel beneath the serpentine drab wool. "No, my lord," she said, her voice soft but absolute. "I think you are the one who does not understand." She was moved at dusk. not to a chamber befitting the keeper of the royal beast, but to a cold stone cell of a room in the rookery tower, adjacent to curing cavernous den. It was clean, Spartan, and isolated, a bed, a table, a chair, and a single high window that looked out over the northern crags. It was a cage, polished and presented as a privilege. Valerius himself, suffocating blanket. He did not speak as they ascended the winding stairs, his footsteps precise and even behind her. Kier padded alongside her, a massive, silent shadow that was both her shield and the reason for her imprisonment. He stopped at the heavy oak door. "Your meals will be brought. You will not leave this wing without my permission. The beast's bare needs are your only concern. Its food is prepared in the lower kitchens. Its water is drawn from the well in the beast yard. You will see to it. Personally." He handed her a heavy iron key. It was cold against her skin. This was his concession to the law. She would be the keeper, but only within the confines he dictated. He would control her by controlling her world. "What if he needs to hunt?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the stone corridor. Valerius's expression did not change, but something in his eyes darkened. "Then you will request an escort from me?" He was making it clear. Her newfound station was a leash, and he held the end of it. She took the key, her fingers closing around it. She had been invisible now. She was a specimen under glass. She was, sure which was worse. As he turned to leave, his leather-gloved hand resting on the pommel of his sword, a thought struck her, sharp and unwelcome. He had been the one to close the old man in eyes. The grief on him was not the performative sorrow of the court. It was a vast, silent emptiness she could feel radiating from him like the cold from a tomb. He was not just protecting the kingdom in order, he was guarding the last piece of the man he had served his entire life. He was protecting a memory, and she, a nobody, had just stumbled into its heart. He paused at the top of the stairs looking back at her. The torchlight threw his face into sharp relief, a mask of controlled duty. "Do not think this gives you power, girl," he warned, his voice low. "It only makes you a target." Then he was gone, and his footsteps faded into the oppressive silence of the tower. The sound of a heavy bolt sliding shut at the bottom of the tower stairs. Alara stood in the doorway of her new life, the key heavy in her hand, the most powerful creature in the kingdom breathing softly beside her. He was right. This was not power. It was a death sentence with a better view. The days bled into a rigid routine. Dawn. She would unbar the passage to Kieran. Denis' vast vaulted space, smelling of rock and pine and sleeping predator, and check his water, his bedding of fresh straw. Mid-morning, she would descend to the beast yard, a lonely, high-walled courtyard to oversee his exercise. And always Valerius was there, not with her, but near a shadow on the battlements above, a still figure in a distant doorway. He never spoke, but his presence was a constant, unnerving pressure. He was watching, waiting for her to fail. The court, of course, was buzzing. Whispers followed her like flies. The ambitious nephew of the late king, Lord Cassian, made his interest known first. He was everything Valerius was not. Handsome in a polished public way, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, and a voice that dripped with condescending sympathy. He found her in the beastyard one afternoon, appearing as if from thin air while Kier tracked a scent along the far wall. "Mistress Solera," he began, his tone smooth as oiled silk. "A title of respect is in order. I think you carry a great burden." He stood too close, his expensive cologne a cloying intrusion in the clean, cold air. She took a half step back, her hand resting instinctively on Kieran's neck as the beast trotted back to her side, a low rumble in its chest. Cassian's eyes flickered to the beast, a momentary loss of composure. "The court is concerned," he continued, recovering his poise. "Such a vital symbol of the realm, strength, now bound to, well, to one with no training. No lineage, the beast trained me, Alara said flatly. For years I brought him his meals when the stable hands were too afraid. I spoke to him when others threw rocks. He knows my scent. He knows my hand. That is the only training that matters. Cashinan's smile tightened, of course, a simple rustic bond, very touching. But politics are not so simple. There are factions. Those who see this as a sign of instability, they might seek to rectify the situation. You are unprotected. He let the threat hang in the air. I, however, believe in honoring the beastie choice. With the proper guidance, of course. I could be a powerful friend to you, Alara. I could ensure your safety, your position. He was offering her a gilded cage, different from Valerius in a stone one, but a cage all the same. He wanted to own the symbol. From the corner of her eye, she saw a movement on the wall, walk Valerius, a dark silhouette against the gray sky. He was watching them. I have all the protection I need, my lord, she said, her fingers stroking the thick ruff of Kieran fur. The bestian amber eyes were fixed on Cassian, unblinking. Cassian in charm curdled. A girl and her dog. A touching fairy tale. But fairy tales have endings, Mistress Alara, and they are rarely happy. He gave a curt, dismissive bow and swept away, his fine cloak swirling behind him. The moment he was gone, the tension in the yard lessened, but a new, colder dread took its place. Valerius was a known danger, a storm she could see and prepare for. Cassian was a poison in the wine, a knife in the dark. That night, the accident happened. She was leading Kier back from the yard when a series of heavy training dummies, hoisted by rope and pulley to the upper levels of the armory, suddenly gave way. The sharp crack of fraying rope, followed by the percussive thud of sand-filled leather hitting stone, they crashed to the ground just feet from where she and Kier whopped, throwing up dust and stone chips. Kier snarled, shielding her with his body. But the danger was already over. It was too precise to be a coincidence. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. She looked up. High above, in the darkened archway of the armory, a figure melted back into the shadows. She had seen a face, only a fleeting shape. It was a warning, a demonstration of her vulnerability. She stood there for a long moment, her hand trembling slightly on curring back, the dust settling around her. Then, from the opposite end of the passage, Valerius appeared. He was running. He simply materialized from the gloom, his stride measured, his face a mask. He stopped before her, his gaze sweeping over the fallen dummies, then to her, then to the beast. He was looking for injury, his assessment swift and clinical. Are you harmed? He asked. The words were clipped, devoid of emotion. No, she breathed. He knelt, his gloved hand running expertly along Kieran's flank, checking for strained muscles or cuts. The gesture was surprisingly gentle. It was the first time she had seen him touch the beast since the funeral. The rope was cut, he said, his eyes fixed on the frayed end dangling from the pulley system high above. It wasn't a guess, it was a statement of fact. He rose to his feet, his gaze locking with hers. For a terrifying second, she thought he might accuse her, might see this as some clumsy ploy for sympathy, but his eyes held something else. A flicker of cold, controlled fury. It wasn't directed at her. Khan, he said. It was not a request. He turned and walked back toward the rookery tower, not waiting to see if she followed. She did, Kier padding silently at her heels. The world had shrunk to the narrow corridor, the sound of their footsteps, and the unspoken knowledge that someone had just tried to kill her. He was right. She was a target. And he, for reasons she could not begin to fathom, had just positioned himself between her and the threat. The rookery den was colder than usual. A draft snaked in from a poorly sealed arrow slit, carrying the scent of imminent snow. Valerius lit a second brazier, the flames pushing back the shadows but not the chill. He moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing, every action deliberate and necessary. He said nothing about the cut rope, about Cassian, about the danger that now clung to her like a shroud. He spoke only of the beast. His winter coat is coming in. He'll need more protein. You'd have the kitchens prepare venison. He checked the water trough, his gloved fingers testing the temperature. The water must not be allowed to freeze. See to it. It was his way of coping. To retreat into duty, into the familiar litany of care and maintenance, it was a language she understood. She fetched a heavy wool blanket from her room and began rubbing Kier down, drying the dampness from his fur, where the evening mist had settled. The beast sighed, a low rumble of pleasure, and leaned his weight against her. They worked in silence for a long time. The only sounds, the crackle of the braziers and the soft rasp of wool on fur. The shared danger had altered the space between them. His presence was no longer just a pressure. It was a fixed point in the chaos, a strange and unwelcome anger. The old king, she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. A day he used to say Kier could smell a lie from 100 pace. Valeria stopped what he was doing. He stood with his back to her, staring into the flames. The light played over the hard lines of his shoulders. He said many things. Valerius replied, his voice rough. Most of them were true. He trusted the Beastern judgment more than any man. She once sure why she was pushing, why she was speaking of the dead king to the man who was a living monument to his memory. Perhaps it was the cold, or the fear still thrumming beneath her skin. Perhaps she just needed to hear a voice that wasn't her own. He turned slowly. His face, in the flickering firelight, was stripped bare of its usual iron control. For a moment, she saw not the master of the hunt, but a man hollowed out by loss. The king trusted the bond, he said, his voice low and guttural. He believed it was the one true thing in a kingdom of shadows, a compass, and that when he was gone, it would point the way. He looked from her to the beast, and his gaze was heavy with the weight of that belief. He was a man of law, of order, of tangible things. And he was trapped by a legacy of faith, a legacy that had landed impossibly at her feet. He never imagined it would point to a servant and child with no name and no hish. She finished for him, her voice devoid of self-pity. It was just a fact. He took a step toward her. The air crackled. "What is your name?" he asked. Not her title. Not girl. Her name? Alar. Alar, he repeated, the word sounding strange and formal in his mouth. You are not a servant and child? It was a statement, not a question. The granite was gone from his face. She froze, the blanket clutched in her hand. Her private wound, the one she had carried in secret for so long, was suddenly exposed to the cold air. My father was Lord Arden, she said, the words tasting of rust. He chose the wrong side in the border wars. The king was merciful. He allowed my father an honorable death and let his only child disappear into the castle kitchens rather than be exiled or executed. He gave me a life of invisibility. It was the kindest thing he could have done. Valerius stared at her, and in his eyes, she saw the pieces clicking into place, her speech, her composure, her refusal to be cowed. It was not the defiance of a servant, it was the buried pride of a fallen house. Arden, he murmured. Arden, he was a good man, a foolish one, but a good one. He knew, of course he knew everything that happened within these walls. He had known all along who she was, and he had let her remain invisible now. That was no longer possible. He had been witnessed by her, seen the grief he held so tightly, and now he was witnessing her, seeing the truth she had kept hidden. The silence that fell between them was different. It was not empty. It was filled with the weight of her history and his, a shared landscape of loss and loyalty. He reached out his gloved hand, hovering in the space between them. He did not touch her. He touched the thick fur of Karen's neck right next to where her own hand rested. His knuckles brushed hers. A sharp intake of breath, barely audible. The contact was fleeting, accidental, but it burned like a brand. It was a universe of intimacy in a single stolen moment. He pulled his hand back as if burned, his composure snapping back into place like a steel trap. He turned away, adjusting the fit of his leather glove with a sharp, precise tug. It was a gesture she had seen 100 times, a small, unconscious act of restoring his own armor. But this time, she understood it. It was not about control. It was about containment. He walked to the door of the den, pausing with his hand on the iron latch. "Lock this door behind me," he said, his back still to her. "Do not open it for anyone." He did not say her name again. The morning brought a summons. Not from Valerius, but from the interim council, headed by Lord Cassian. His move was faster than Sheedy anticipated. He was using the accident with the training dummies as his pretext. The council convened in the lesser throne room, a place of cold marble and suffocating tapestries. Alara stood in the center of the floor alone. Kier was not permitted inside. He waited in the antechamber, 2 of Cassian personal guards flanking the door, a clear message of whose authority now reigned. Valerius stood to the right of the empty regent chair, his face impassive, his posture rigid. He was a pillar of salt. A silent observer, he had not spoken to her since the previous night. The touch, the moment of shared history, might never have happened. Cassian presided, his expression one of grave concern. He spoke of the stability of the realm, the sanctity of the royal line, and the sacred duty to protect its greatest symbol. He recounted the incident with the dummies, embellishing it, painting a picture of a hapless girl utterly incapable of defending herself, let alone the Kingern beast. "The bond is sacred, of course," Cassian said, his voice resonating with false piety as he addressed the assembled lords. "But the keeper must also be capable. The beast is not a pet. It is the embodiment of our strength. Can we, in good conscience, leave it in the hands of a lone, untrained girl of no standing?" He paused, letting his words sink in. "And I propose the formation of a guardianship council, a body of noble lords, myself included, to oversee the care and protection of the royal beast. Mistress Alara would, of course, continue her duties, but under our direct supervision, for her safety and for the security of the king." It was a political masterstroke. He wasn't challenging the beast-drain choice directly. He was strangling it with process, wrapping it in layers of oversight until she was nothing more than a figurehead, a puppet on his strings. He would control her, and through her, he would control the most potent symbol of power in the land. All eyes turned to her. They expected her to be grateful, to meekly accept their protectant. She looked at the faces of the lords, greedy, fearful, indifferent. And then she looked at Valerius. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. But she remembered the feeling of his hand next to hers, the weight of his gaze when he learned her name. He was waiting to see what she would do. She drew a breath. The silence in the room was absolute. "My lord," she began, her voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the room. "Lord Cassian speaks of my safety. He is right to be concerned. An attempt was made on my life." A murmur went through the crowd. Cassian, an expression tightened. This was not how he had planned it. "However," she continued, her eyes finding Cassianard, "the threat is not my weakness. The threat is from those who see the beast not as a sacred bond, but as a title to be claimed. A stepping stone to a throne." But every person in the room understood it. Cassian's face paled slightly with rage. "The law of the bond is not about strength of arms or noble lineage. If it were, Kier would have chosen one of you." She let her gaze sweep over the council. "He did not. He chose a bond of loyalty and trust, forged not in ceremony, but in quiet service, the same loyalty he gave the late king, The same loyalty he now gives me to place a counsel between us would not be to protect the bond. It would be to break it, and a broken bond will leave this kingdom with nothing but a grieving, uncontrollable monster. Is that the stability you seek, my lord? She had laid the trap. Now she had only to spring it. She turned her head and looked directly at Valerius. She did not plead. She did not appeal. She simply met his eyes, a silent challenge. Here is the law you serve. Here is the truth. You know. Choose. The silence stretched thin and taut. Valerius had not moved a muscle. He was the kingy man, a servant of the crown, a creature of order and tradition. Cassian was the new power, the logical future. To side with her was to defy the council, to risk everything, on the word of a girl with a dead father dame. Cassian smiled, sensing his victory. Lord Valerius, he said smoothly, ah, as master of the hunt and the man who knew the beast best. Next to our late king, your counsel would be invaluable. Do you believe this child can truly provide the security required? Valerius' gaze shifted from Alara to Cassian. He took one step forward. The sound of his boots on the marble was like a gavel falling. Lord Cassian is Karen, Valerius said, his voice calm, and even a wave of relief washed over Cassian's face. Alaran, heart fell. The keeper must be capable, Valerius continued, his eyes cold as winter stone. But capability is not measured in the number of guards one has. It is measured in understanding. I have watched Mistress Alara. I have seen her with the beast. There is no fear in her. There is no ambition. There is only respect. The same respect the king demanded. He paused, letting his words settle. The incident with the training dummies was not a sign of her weakness. It was a sign that someone in this very castle is willing to endanger the royal beast to further their own political ends. He looked directly at Cassian. The accusation was no longer veiled. It was a blade laid bare. The bond is unbroken. To interfere with it is an act of treason against the crown in the memory of the king. The beast chose its keeper. We will honor that choice. Or we will answer for the consequences. He took a step back, resuming his position by the chair. He had said no more than 100 words, but he had dismantled Cassian, entire political future, with the precision of a surgeon. The lords shifted uncomfortably. To defy Valerius was to defy the living embodiment of the old kingy will. The motion for a council died without a vote. Cassian, his face a mask of fury, could do nothing but stammer his assent to the wisdom of the kingy most loyal servant. Alara was dismissed. She walked from the room, her legs unsteady, her mind reeling. He had chosen her. He had chosen a forgotten girl and an ancient law over power and pragmatism. As the antechamber doors closed behind her, Kerr rose to his feet and pressed his massive head against her side. She buried her face in his fur, breathing in his familiar wild scent. A moment later, the doors opened again. It was Valerius. The 2 guards Cassian had posted were gone. He stopped a few feet away from her, the space between them humming with everything that had just happened, with everything that had been left unsaid. He looked tired. The battle had cost him something. You are no longer a target, he said, his voice low. You are a power. They will fear you now. They will fear you, she corrected him softly. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He reached up and began to unfasten the leather gloves he always wore. It was a slow, deliberate movement. One by one, he pulled them off, his bare hands, looking strangely vulnerable in the dim light. The motif, the armor, was gone. The den, he said, his voice rougher now, less controlled. Odd. The northern wall has a loose stone. Behind it is a passage. It leads to the outer wall. The king had it made. In case of a siege, he was giving her an escape route. He was giving her a key to a cage she had even known she was in. He was trusting her. I won't run, she said. I know. His gaze was intense, unwavering. He saw her, all of her. The orphan, the lady, the keeper. But a queen should always know the way out of her own castle. He did not smile. He did not move closer. He simply stood there, having given her the last secret of a dead king, a final, binding act of loyalty. The silence returned, but it was a new kind of silence. It was not the absence of sound. It was a space they had carved out for themselves, a stillness earned through risk and trust. It felt impossibly like a beginning silence broken only by the sound of the bestine's steady, rhythmic breathing. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then gave a single formal nod. He turned and walked away down the corridor, his footsteps echoing on the stone, leaving her with the beast, the secret, and the deafening, hopeful quiet.